What would a monument of the present look like? If today's monuments feature historical figures and events to remember the past, what will monuments of tomorrow remember from today? Our media feeds seem saturated with stories of rising income inequality, technological disruptions, armed conflicts, and global warming, which all pose existential threats to present civilizations. Could a monument help us express and cope with these present concerns? Since the earliest human societies, monuments served as point of congregation and geographical markers that conveyed common beliefs and values. Statues, obelisks, and arches were built in different shapes and sizes using materials that carried meaning. The finely carved stone pillars of Göbekli Tepe evoked stability and protection to function as sanctuary for hunter-gatherers from 9600 BCE. Likewise, copper and gold in the great statue of Egyptian pharaoh Khafre recalled the sun's eternal radiance and provided a shining armor for the emperor's spirit after his death circa 2200 BCE. Many natural landmarks also act as monuments, such as the massive sandstone monolith of Uluru, rising more than 300 meters above its surrounding desert. Shaped by geological processes in Australia's Red Centre, this site is sacred for the Anangu people, which have adorned the rock with mythological paintings. Over to the Mediterranean basin, clashes between Christians, Jews, and Muslims have left many scars on the churches, synagogues, and mosques of medieval times. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem was erected in the 4th century, demolished in the 7th, then rebuilt in the 11th century to chronicle such moments when the three Abrahamic traditions have fought and reconciled in close succession. As religious passions subsided in the modern era, the industries of Europe and North America soared, and art positioned itself at the vanguard of great transformations. Vladimir Tatlin's sculpture entitled Monument to the Third International epitomized these utopian ideals concocted in the aftermath of the 1917 Russian Revolution. For celebrating the radical changes of industrial progress, Tatlin was anointed Master of Modern Aesthetics, even while his tower was never realized at full scale. Failing the utopic expectations of modern ideologies, architects turned to more austere forms in the 1950s and 60s, a style championed by brutalism which catered to the practical needs of public institutions, housing projects, and sports centers, while seeking to embody collective values through simple geometric forms and neutral colors. After this sweeping review of ancient, indigenous, medieval, and modern monuments, we find that none of their inherent ideals were universal. Still today, frictions accumulate when contradictions appear between the narratives mediated by official monuments and the living conditions of neighboring communities to inexorably result in crisis situations. Hence, Confederate monuments in the United States exacerbate race relations as they thinly veil the glorification of slavery and racism on par with statues of colonial figures perpetuating the myths of imperialism. Such works also acted as propaganda tools for totalitarian regimes of the 20th century's Soviet Union, China, and, in more extreme measures, for those of Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy, which demanded loyalty and admiration while also suppressing dissent among its citizens. Other structures recently built in the Western Hemisphere assert the more elusive yet more widespread paradigms of neoliberalism, which aspire to the same ends as totalitarian art. This observation is integrated in Sheldon Wolin's formulation of inverted totalitarianism to describe how corporations infiltrate the cogs of state bureaucracies, then impose social measures that are superficially less abject but just as violent as colonial regimes. The entrenchment of neoliberal values within governments leads to a succession of crises, a reduction in the number of public institutions, the privatization of essential services, and a growing intolerance for divergent views. This hegemony of market logic manifests itself mainly in the design of urban spaces, with a proliferation of skyscrapers in New York, London, Dubai, Hong Kong, and other financial hubs. Such architectures become monuments that exhort the supremacy of profit and the concentration of power for those already at the top of the economic ladder. When these crises reach breaking point, protesters take to the streets and often target monuments to express their grievances. Crowds have torn down statues of monarchs during the French Revolution of 1789, and 200 years later, with the fall of the Soviet Union, they toppled effigies of Lenin and Stalin. When these sculptures proved too difficult to destroy, protesters vandalized them instead, as countless Christopher Columbus figures were painted red to convert the historical figure's reputation from explorer of new worlds to slayer of indigenous peoples. Burdened by years of disrepair, armed conflicts, and bad weather, monuments in ruin provide material evidence that no empire is eternal. Crumbling bricks and overgrown vegetation show the scars of time on the British Secretariat in Yangon, Myanmar, left vacant since the retreat of colonial forces. The Maya temples in Mexico and Moai statues of Easter Island also testify to the vulnerability of native civilizations. Yet these ancient sites harbor lost knowledge, unraveling after patient archaeological research to tell the history of once thriving peoples and also cautionary tales of their own demise. The end of an empire sometimes brings the rise of another, as ancient Greek and Roman artifacts fostered a renaissance in European tastes for nature, human anatomy, and perspective. Leon Battista Alberti and other 15th century architects famously studied Roman ruins to appropriate their columns, domes, and arches. Romantic authors like Mary Shelley also took cues from the Greek Odyssey to depict landscapes that contrasted from the industrial skylines of England in the early 1800s. In more recent times, some artists have mimicked the appearance of old relics when creating new works. From Robert Smithson's spiral jetty to Doris Salcedo's piles of broken furniture, these installations seem already in ruin. Could it be to speak directly to the archaeologists of tomorrow? Just as physical structures take on new meaning when broken, so do digital files, software, hardware, and online platforms fall into ruin, but in a much faster time span. Even web giants like MySpace and GeoCities fell overnight under the pressures of planned obsolescence and market crashes. The demise of these social networks resulted in scores of lost online communities transformed into digital ghost towns, ruins memorializing a very recent past. The case for non-fungible tokens discloses the erratic nature of investors in the technology sector, unwilling to weather a dip in the commercial value of NFTs. As soon as this speculative bubble started deflating, collectors fled in drove, and most tokens lost their financial appeal by the end of 2023. Just a few seminal pieces kept their cultural capital, such as Larva Labs' CryptoPunks, among the remains of a swiftly plundered and burnt-out digital scene. With her concept of poor images, Hito Steyerl offers a useful metaphor to understand the digital ruin. These low-resolution, degraded images that circulate freely on and offline reach broader audiences and take on new meanings because of their fragmented and pixelated status. With the ensuing drop in file sizes, poor images get easier to publish, download, and even transfer onto new materials. Although ruined digital monuments may seem impoverished in authority and authenticity, their accessibility is enriched with a broader audience reach and a wider range of potential interpretations. Such derelict digital objects are likely to be reappropriated when released from the confines of privatization to then claim a new lease of life as public goods. Against the neoliberal trend to commodify innovation and progress, broken digital artworks prosper between the cracks of failing systems and other technological bugs. Much like vandalized statues, crumbling Roman arches, or even Tatlin's unfinished tower, ruined monuments deviate from their prescribed use and reclaim new means and ends via their poor image status. From the remains of destitute files, abandoned websites, and bankrupt platforms, so do ruined digital monuments become meta. The degradation of metamonuments has not compromised their ease to migrate and duplicate themselves onto various mediums and infinite variations, thus occupying countless spaces at once. By transgressing the limitations of digital and online domains, metamonuments enter a category that Timothy Morton calls hyperobjects, which are massively distributed in time and space. Unlike traditional monuments contained in geostatic spaces, and inversely from scarce digital files monopolized by a single commercial platform, metamonuments are embedded in a web of relations with countless virtual, material, and human agents like software, screens, electric cables, users, communities, and more. So do creators, spectators, and curators help metamonuments to become omnipresent by propagating them on and offline and by reaching a growing number of peers. As massively distributed poor images, metamonuments endure within the decentralized data of Web 3.0, the user-generated content of Web 2.0, the shared files of Web 1.0, as much as in the analog copies of print media, photographic film, magnetic tapes, engravings, weavings, and so on. It is clearly these perpetual motions which transform metamonuments into hyperobjects caught in a looping sequence of emergence, expansion, and dissolution. No doubt, from these means of sustaining metamonuments, users will also discover their own conditions of possibility in crisis situations. When caring for metamonuments, they gain an awareness of their own adaptability, interoperability, and collective agency to facilitate their own survival in the meta-crisis in real time. After restoring, hosting, and upgrading metamonuments in their multiple and hybrid avatars, the same attention may be redirected towards soothing, sheltering, and repairing the damages caused by climate change, wealth inequality, armed conflicts, and other disruptions. Moreover, it is through the creation of such layered experiences, embracing complexity and emergence, that the narratives of contemporary lives are generated by virtue of peer-to-peer exchanges on a grand scale, unfettered by the profit incentives of privatization. So does the creation, use, and maintenance of metamonuments offer a glimpse into the depth and breadth of collective sentiment. In a best-case scenario, the ontology of our current age seems best outlined by metamonuments, by producing meta-narratives that transcend geographical positions, overlap multiple cultural and material conditions, and echo the contingent values of today's hyper-connected world.